in the remote meeting, I would like to ask the panel to propose a chair for this meeting until Councillor Kerr arrives. Councillor Harley?
Could I nominate Catherine
Councillor
to
Miles?
be Councillor Miles to be chair?
Absolutely. Is that seconded by anyone?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. We'll just go to a quick vote. For all of you could say yes if you agree with that. So all in favour?
Yes.
Yes.
Any against? Abstentions? Congratulations, Councillor Miles. You're the chair of this panel. I will send you the notes over in 2 seconds.
Thank you. Okay. So before we as we kick off, then first of all, any apologies. I think we're expecting Councillor Kerr to be joining us soon, but I think that's the only apology from the councillor side. And then from the officer side, I think we've heard that Councillor Chapman is unable to make the meeting, but I think Mish, you're going to be providing, or Tina, some contributions from his side. So thank you for that. Any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Then we move on to chair's announcements. I think there are any announcements, unless Jonathan, is there anything that we need to be aware of that are to be announced? I'm not sure. I'm just opening the running order. Nothing to announce. Super. In which case, then we move to then the notes of the previous meeting. Do we have any amends to those? To the meeting notes from the last meeting. All those in agreement? Is that okay? Yeah, all okay. In which case then we approve those, they're agreed, and then we move on to, I'm just opening up the running order, sorry, on a different computer, so bear with me. We're going to the Climate and Environment Work Panel to discuss and agree any amendments to that. Anything on that anyone wants to raise?
If members would like, I can quickly run through the work plan and just note that there's one further meeting this municipal year.
Thank you. Yeah, if you'd like to just mention the topics, I think, is it that we will be looking at for the next meeting?
Sure, bear me
Thank
2
you.
seconds. That's right. Right, so the items for the next meeting will be so an update again on the net zero master plan, but I will speak with Tina and Councillor Kerr for that, and also there's a development of the biodiversity strategy update, and I've been in the middle of a conversation between Councillor Kerr and Tina on some other updates which will be provided for the panel, hopefully at their next meeting.
Great. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, in which case then we move back onto the next agenda item, which is a report back on recommendations from the last meeting. Any questions on that?
I can quickly run through that if
you
the panel
could,
wish.
please, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Certainly. So the last meeting, there was an update on the eco moorings update, and they were one recommendation for that item was accepted in part. The next item was a high-level challenges and constraints impacting the deliverability of solar opportunities at council car parks. The panel suggested 3 recommendations, and all 3 of those were accepted.
Thank you. So then we move on to the item number 7, which is the Net Zero Master Plan update, which is in the supplementary agenda. Welcome, Councillor Ailton. I see that you've joined us. Thank you. And we've got another panelist that's joined as well. So welcome. For this, I think, Tina, I think we come over to you to introduce the report, and then we'll go through any questions after that. Thank you.
Just working out how to share. I think I'm okay. So I was going to, first of all, I did the sort of paper that goes alongside with this, but I thought it's easier just to sort of take you through the key areas where there's been some progress, really. So if I start off with 2030, and the main areas I was going to take you through are the ones which are highlighted in green, really, because they're the ones that have had the most progress. So number 4, which is the one that's been around a little while, was the sort of commissioning feasibility study to assess land assets for sustainability measures. At the moment, the key bits of work that we have ongoing on that are the biodiversity net gain, looking at our own land, which is a project that's been ongoing for a little while, and that's still progressing, and there has been more progress on that, and we now have a pretty good idea of the number of credits available and the number and types of credits available on our own land, but there's still more work to do on the processes in relation to that, and actually working out whether it's going to be viable or not. The council's also started looking at its small sites available, and we're also now feeding into a project where potentially looking at some of those small sites and whether it'd be possible for, I haven't included that in this update actually, but subsequent to that, to energy potential such as battery and solar. So that's also ongoing. Then, and unless there's any questions on that one, I'm going to move on to next item 3, and that's the carbon literacy training. So that is progressing. Maybe a little bit slowly, but it is progressing. We've trained 33 staff, or Sean, who looks after it, has done. I think we're reviewing the target. Everybody's very busy at the moment and trying to realign, actually making sure that what we're doing is relevant and targeting the people that it's going to have the most help with, or most support with, I think. And we've also supported ODS with some carbon literacy training. So we've revised our target from aiming for silver, which was 30% of the council, down to bronze, which is just over 100 people, I think. And we're still looking at that because the point is we don't want to do something just for the sake of doing it. It needs to be valuable and match what people need to learn and understand and is relevant for their roles, etc. Moving on to item number 6, which was the Salix project, which was this revolving loan where we could utilise funding that we were given, which was a £500,000 loan from Salix and £500,000 originally from the council into a sort of energy projects. And we were getting near the end of that project now. That revolving loan closes very shortly, and we had the remaining projects to finish. So I can say that all of those remaining projects are now completed, and we're now we've submitted into our 10-year period payback, and we will more than recover the money that needs to be repaid back to Salix. So it's been a pretty successful project. That's it on that one. Any questions on that one before I move on to 2040?
Anyone from no?
Okay. Then moving on to 2040, there's a few more on here. So community employment and procurement plans, what's been happening on those, and there's an update here from the Regen team, basically explaining that we've now got 6 live SEPs, as they're called as an acronym, and further 7 Section 106 looking at further SEP plans. And then we move on to SPF funding. So what's been happening with the SPF funding? So this year we actually had some funding in the environmental sustainability team, and we've employed the same person who's actually been dealing with carbon literacy, has been working on providing funding for green skills courses. And I think it's been relatively successful. When I added it up, I think we've provided funding for around 58 different courses. And there's also work ongoing to see what we can do in relation to some of these bits and pieces in the future. One element that we've been working with ODS on quite a long time is trying to get this highways electrical certifications in place, which means that they can also do work on the highway in relation to EV, lamppost, and other bits and pieces. So it's really good news to see that that's also ongoing. I think that then also links in really much to item 15, because it's the sort of same area, really, looking at how the funding can be utilised in other places. And that's also been very successful in supporting SMEs through green tech. And you can see here there's quite a number of enterprises and different organisations that have been supported by the funding over the last year.
Does anyone have any questions on this point? Because I have a question. Anyone? Jemima, Judith? No, Tina, just on this, question is around whether you gather data on the SMEs and the people that have been receiving this training and support, because just wanting to ensure that, you know, women-owned businesses are also accessing some of this support. Sometimes they don't always find out about these opportunities, and also given sort of with the green transition, we want to ensure that it's inclusive, and we know that there can be gender gaps in workforce participation in some of these sectors. Just wanting to clarify how that's addressed in then the process of who is benefiting from it.
Very good question. I can't, to be honest, I don't know the answer off the top of my head because I'm not directly managing it well. So I will go and find out the answer to that and let you know. And I'm sure the data will definitely be available because they're all done through sources that will record that, but I can find that information out, Catherine, and let you know.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So moving on to item 17, which is the housing stock and yeah, looking at surveys and strategy and programme for decarbonisation on our own housing stock. So my understanding is that, and this is the information is provided by Property and Housing, is that that's the 5-year plan is now in place. We carry on doing the energy performance checks, stock condition surveys, and moving forward with that information. I think there's been as we do this, we're finding out that some of the ratings that we thought were right are incorrect. So there's some calibration of bits and pieces, etc., going in and around that. And work continues on developing the wider longer term strategy. Moving on to items 20 and 21, which is about enforcement of properties with EPCs F and below, and also the licensing scheme for HMOs. So mainly dealing with landlords and tenants and other elements. So my understanding, the inspection programme is ongoing. Proactive enforcement is currently not taking place as much as we want because there isn't enough resource in the teams. Our energy efficiency officer, Emily, who works in our team, has carried on though doing a lot of engagement work, and many letters and lots of engagement has gone along. We also now have a bespoke set of tools which shows similar type properties, so people can get sort of very detailed retrofit advice about what they could do on their own property, and that's being published. And actually a press release is going out about that today.
Do we have any questions on that from either Judith or Jemima? No questions.
I was just curious about the well, not uptake, but because it's council building, but you know how much insulation is part of this package, and whether there's any detail around that.
You mean in terms of what
just in terms of efficiency, because actually you know it's critical and it's key actually, isn't it, to housing efficiency is the use of insulation.
It is. I mean, we do have, Emily provides a very good service of supporting tenants, landlords and people in fuel property with the available grants that are available. So connecting them with grants, and so they have an understanding of what they can apply for. But we, in terms of the kind of properties we're talking here, which are private properties, we don't have a mechanism of providing support directly for those people by our own funding, etc. It's only by government grants. And Emily is the main sort of support for that in terms of providing advice and connecting people to grants and bits and pieces that are available. Does that help to answer that question?
Yes, I mean, it's just, you know, it's obviously, as I said, critical, and yeah, if Emily's steering people towards grants, then that's all we can do, I suppose, at this point in time.
Yeah. There was a significant focus on that, and we've linked up through the air quality work that we've been doing. So when we did the smoke control expansion work, all the letters went out alongside that, directing people to various grants and that they could link into for uptake, for example. So we're trying to connect things together as much as possible.
Thank you for your work. We've seen these leaflets around regarding some of this. I mean, just in terms of the uptake, I'd be interested, are you getting uptake from like a broad range of people who are interested, or are there some gaps where you would hope there was some engagement where there have perhaps been less interest. And then the second question I've got is around, now that the budget has been passed for the council, I think that included, if I recall, extra enforcement capacity. Will this be used to enable the enforcement around the low EPC rating of some of the private properties? Or is it going to be allocated to other kind of enforcement action? I think the real challenge is, in some ways, there's very little use in having a policy if we're not actually able to enforce it, which is obviously the challenge in a tight budget environment. But any reflections on that would be helpful. Thank you.
I can't answer the latter one, so we'll have to go back and ask the team and find out some information from them, I think, about in relation to that. I'm assuming they will do, but I mean, we need to clarify that question. And then in terms of gaps, then again, I probably need to go and get some more detailed information from Emily. I know that we do everything we can to support with engaging with as many tenants through as many, and landlords and private homeowners as much as we possibly can through as many different mechanisms as we possibly can. But we can look at that in more detail and see what information we can provide back on that.
Thank you. Judith, anything from your side? Any further questions on this? No. Okay. So yeah, please continue, Tina. Thank you.
Next on the list is our own developments and what we're doing about making those better than building regulations require in terms of energy capacity requirements. And my understanding is that we're doing it where we can do it and where local electricity capacity enables and allows us to do that. And I was given a couple of examples of, I think there's still the challenge is still around often about whether there is enough spare electricity capacity to enable us to do those things.
Thank you. Just a quick question from my side on this one, but just Judith, Jemima, do you have any questions on these developments? Okay. Question from my side is, you mentioned Collins Street, and then there's an abbreviation, ASHP design has been included.
An air source heat pump, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Thank you. And yeah, maybe could you just clarify, because these the Collins Street development, I think, is really is taking on real life now. It looks like a proper housing. What are the features then, other than an air source heat pump, that are going to be integrated there?
I don't know all the details.
Okay, don't worry. It's okay, don't worry. Okay, not a problem.
I don't know all the details of the designs of all the developments, so I can't tell you everything. All I know is the information that the team gave me. So maybe going forward, there's a better way of dealing with this, and maybe we need to ask some of the teams where I get the information from to come along and to provide some information in relation to some of these items if we want to look at them. Maybe that's a consideration for, I don't know.
I mean, one recommendation would, to actually offer councillors such as us a site visit, because this is something that comes up in planning as well, that actually everything's so abstract and academic, and actually to visit a kind of exemplary new build that the council have just put in with all the various bits.
Yeah,
it might be worth a visit. That might be a recommendation.
I'm sure that can be facilitated and arranged.
Yeah, I don't know what other councillors think, but Catherine's just raised an interesting point, and actually it's much easier to discuss these things if one's had a 20-minute visit.
We could certainly, if you're in agreement, also Judith, we could put that forward as a recommendation coming from this. It seems to be something that could be quite practical and valuable. So if that could be arranged, Tina, for those who are interested, maybe we document that as a recommendation. Jonathan, do we have to agree the exact wording of this at this point?
Just for my benefit, would committee just remind me of the full recommendation, what was just said by Councillor Hunt, just so I can note that as the recommendation? So
the recommendation is that the sustainability team invite councillors to visit an exemplary net zero new build in the council's housing stock, to see the net zero features. Is that the essence of what you are communicating, Jemima? Does that cover?
Yeah, a site visit to see, yep, a current build, a new build, in order to learn and take on board, you know, the sustainability factors.
That's fine. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And do you support that as well, Judith? I can see a nod, I think, but yeah, that's great. Thank you. All noted. Tina, I think you've got a couple more points you want to run through, so please back to you. Thank you.
No, fine. I was just going to say on the Eco Moorings project, there's been a little bit of a delay due to the electricity connections that are required. So that's been delayed for a couple of months now to the beginning of April. But other than that, progress should be fine. And then the last one, which is the Go Ultra Low. So that GULO is Go Ultra Low Oxford, which is the on-street chargers, which we've now agreed and negotiated with the county. The county taking on street charging, and they're going to deploy that through the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. That tender now has actually gone out, so the county have issued the tender on behalf of all the districts for on-street and car parking EV charging infrastructure. So these 100+ chargers for Go Ultra Low will be tied up with that. The current timeline is that the tender won't be awarded to around July 2025. So I don't think we'll start to see things really going in the ground until late autumn, probably more likely the year after. So that's, any questions on any of those?
Thank you, Tina. Judith, Jemima, anything that you'd like to clarify?
I was just wondering about sewage and waste as regards eco moorings, because I don't know anything about eco moorings and what sort of provision is made.
The eco moorings are, in the main, I understand it's about electricity connections. So it's about providing, so you don't have to use your kind of diesel, your generator or whatever to burn fuel. So it's about electricity connections. Not about, yeah. It's not looked into the issues around sewage, etc., which are they are a known issue. So
yes, great, thank you.
I'll stop sharing if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just a quick question from my side then on the gully and the fact that these charges are going to be across the city. Will it be, if they're on the highway, will they be sort of evenly distributed, or is there an area where we could put a recommendation around ensuring that there is sort of a distribution of them across the city? Or given that that's now going to be a county matter, it's not something for us to determine or recommend?
No, I mean, there is still the tracker, which enables householders to request where they would like to see chargers, and that's been fed into the information. That was something we held, which is now held county-wide. We've done a lot of work with the county in terms of overlaying the layers and looking at where the highest levels of residents live that don't have access to off-street parking, basically. And then there's an element of looking at the reality of the situation as to where you can actually put charging infrastructure on the street. And then when you can't, then that's where we've been looking at car parks in relation to this. So all of the funding that's gone out through the Levi is basically for on-street or on-street equivalent charging infrastructure. That's what the government's doing. It's helping to support people who do not have access to off-street parking. So we've looked at everything, including HRA. So lots of different layers have been looked at in quite a lot of detail, and we carry on working really closely with the county and all of this. So it's it's very much a joint process. But
thank you, Tina. Councillor Kerr has joined us.
I'm so very sorry. I had a fairly significant diary mix-up, and I still have children in the background. So thank you so much for taking over and chairing. I'll let you continue for a couple of minutes while I bring myself up to speed. Apologies, everybody.
Take a breath. Don't worry. We know what it's like. Okay, so what we have just discussed is the net zero action plan, master plan update. I'm not sure whether there are any further questions more broadly. We've talked about the things that sort of have changed. Are there any questions around the things that are sort of on hold or sort of progress? Any further? Judith, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just had a question about the electric charging, do we have any idea of the distribution of electric cars throughout the city so that we can identify where
No, not really. We
more
Judith's, yeah, it sounds cutting out, isn't it? It is for me. Judith, can you hear us?
charge points might be appropriate?
Yeah, Judith, maybe could you just repeat that last point, because I'm afraid we caught the first part, but you then cut out briefly.
I can hear you. The question was, do we have any
Okay, I think we've lost Judith.
I can
briefly,
kind of
but she's-
answer how we
Yeah,
base our
Please go ahead.
we
We've got you
base
back.
we base the numbers
it was
of,
just whether we
go on, Judith, sorry.
it was just, you know, if we have any idea where the concentration of electric vehicles are to make, you know, best placement of the charging points.
So we don't base it on, we don't have the information specifically on where they are in Oxford, and it's almost impossible to get that information because you can only get the electric things on a sort of Oxford locality via, you know, via the government, basically. What we do base our EV charging parameters on is how many households do not have access to on-street, off-street parking, and then what's the density of those households, and what kind of what we think probably is the car ownership in that locality. And that's what we kind of look at when we try to work out what charging infrastructure is needed in that locality. And we try to make sure that it, you know, is available within a 5-minute walk from those localities. So that's really how the strategy, or our EV strategy, looks at deploying charging infrastructure.
Yeah,
Does that
that's
help?
helpful.
Yeah.
Judith, any follow-up on that? Okay. So in which case, Emily, over to you.
With sincere apologies if this has already been discussed today, but obviously you all recently saw the government's announcement on vans and EV vans, and I just wondered if we had a particular overlay for, you know, plans for kind of increasing van and sort of you know, larger vehicle charging.
We do, and very consciously cognizant of zero emission zone and expansion as well. So we have targeted localities in and around the ring road, particularly, mainly not for people who have vans who live in a street, because it's going to be quite hard to provide EV infrastructure for larger van sites on streets that can be quite complex anyway. So mainly we're looking to provide rapid charging infrastructure in and around the ring road of Oxford, and we've got about 4 sites located in addition to Redbridge Park and Ride, because at the moment the Redbridge barrier means that a reasonable size van can't get in there. So car parks where they do not have barriers, where we can facilitate rapid charging infrastructure, is part of the deployment plans that we have.
Incredible, thank you.
Okay. And we've also looking at designated van bays, actually, as part of it would be the idea. It's just whether that's commercially viable or not, I think.
So are there any recommendations emerging from this these questions about Gully? I don't think there's anything from my side. I can't see anything having emerged from what has just been said, but unless anyone wants to correct me. Okay, in which case then I'm going to pass over to our chair, Emily, and take on the next item. Thank you, Tina, for your hard work and all of the team's work on this. We really appreciate it. Excellent.
Great. And just to check, has the running order been in order of the agenda, or has it switched around as we generally do?
We have been following the agenda, and so we are
Next one is
now at
number 8.
Number 8, yeah, waste
Lovely.
review. So we
Excellent.
have, yeah, thank you, that next. And yeah, and we don't have Councillor Chapman, who sent us apologies. Thank you.
Brilliant. So Mish, I guess over to you on the waste review.
Would it help to take councillors through the slides that I put together and talk to those?
Yes, please.
Useful. Now, are you, Hannah, able to share the slides?
I could share them, Mish. I've got a
If you're
copy
able
of
to,
them.
yep, that'd be
Yeah, thank you.
Just give me 2 seconds.
fantastic.
I mean, they're also in the document, but it's easier usually if you don't mind projecting, and I think that will make it simpler.
So this is something which kicked off last year. I think it's fair to say that it was West Oxfordshire District Council which sort of precipitated the whole review, as West Oxfordshire District Council, which currently has a sort of shared interest in Ubico, which is a LATCO, which covers a number of councils, I think 6 or 7 councils outside of Oxfordshire. So that contract is coming up for renewal, and they wanted to give themselves some real options in terms of what they did going forwards. They've actually taken a cabinet paper through already last month in West Oxfordshire, which sort of set out their objectives. And in short, they're very interested to see whether or not a partnership, a much closer and more integrated partnership within Oxfordshire might deliver efficiencies for themselves, but obviously for everyone else. ODS and the City Council are working effectively as a sort of single entity here, but we're sort of directly involved. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Jonathan? Thanks. So a consultancy called Activist was invited last year to come in and do a sort of an assessment exercise of what the opportunity was to have a much sort of closer way of delivering waste services. At the moment, as I trust members are all familiar, the City Council and the other district councils, we're the waste collection authorities. We collect domestic waste on behalf of all households, and we transport it to either recyclers, so all of the recycling goes to companies that effectively take those recycling products, cardboard, plastic, glass, etc., and they take it on and it goes into a recycling supply chain. Or for residual waste, that goes through to the county council, which goes through to the incinerator at Ardley. There is a very small amount of landfill waste, I think about 3%, something like that, of waste ends up in landfill, and then food waste, of course. And county council has a contract with the biodigester over at Cassington, and so all of the county's food waste goes there. So this sort of separated system, which is common across 2-tier authority areas of the country, works, however, in different ways in those 2-tier areas. So in some areas, there is effectively a joint ownership of a single waste integrated operation. We don't have that at the moment in Oxfordshire. We have really quite sort of separate entities, and each district does very much its own thing. There is no kind of relationships, or has been historically, I should say, no kind of real sort of co-working relationships of any description across the various district boundaries. So the first thing was,
Nish, can I just sorry interrupt to check? Does that lead to a tension where your costs, it basically costs you more to collect things, but the benefits all go to the county? So, for example, if you were to have more food waste, or there'll be an increased cost. So there's not a minimize waste across the whole supply chain incentive, because some people get the costs and some people get the benefits, and it's not the same people.
You've in a sense you've gone right to the heart of this whole issue, which is that food waste is in fact the best example to use. So if we collect more food waste, which is a good thing to do, It's really heavy food waste. It's so I guess everyone sort of can imagine. Food waste is heavy, and so it's actually quite expensive to collect. We then take it out to the Cassington digester. That costs us, the more food waste we collect, the more it costs us as a council. The more food waste we give to the county council, they have a contract. They effectively sell the food waste to the biodigester, and so they get a benefit from that. So absolutely, we can improve food waste collections, and we bear more cost, and the county gets more income. Similarly, the more we recycle, the more we can shrink the contents of the green bin and grow the contents of the blue bin, the less that has to go into the incinerator up at Ardley, and that saves again the county money because they have to pay for that incineration. But actually, with gate prices as they currently are for recycling material, it actually costs us more because we effectively have to pay to get these companies to take away a lot of this. Some of it you get money for, but most of it you don't.
Understood. So currently misaligned incentives, one of the key
Absolutely.
drivers of working closer together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even if, let's say, we weren't integrated, and we started off last year, just 3 councils looking at this. So that was West Oxfordshire, who initiated, ourselves, and Charwell. Even if it was the 3 district authorities, as things currently stand, there isn't any kind of real joint working. So we procure separately. We all have different colour bins. We all have our own lorries. We have, and so there isn't any, efficiencies at the moment. We wanted to look at appetite to collaborate. What level of, how difficult or easy would it be to actually integrate our operations more? What are the size of the savings? And then, as it says at the bottom here, the undertaking that review of the West Oxfordshire District Council contract. And that is just simply that sets a timeline here. And that timeline runs through till 2026 next year, which is when their contract expires, albeit actually they can roll that over for 1 further year. But that's what we're all working to. So next slide, please. In the waste world generally, we're all seeing inflationary pressures. It is quite difficult. We've had some challenges in our recent council budget. We had to put more money into the waste space. It is cost us more. Frankly, more households is one of the reasons. As we can see further housing growth, that's going to be more of an issue. But there are also lots of changes from a legislative point of view. Now, the county has something of a burning platform in that government has said that emissions trading is going to come into effect for the waste sector by 2028. And that would mean that at Ardley, they would actually have to pay carbon credits effectively for everything that's burnt up there. Now, counties estimating that would be somewhere in the order of between £3.5 and £4 million a year. So it's a lot of money. At the same time, for ourselves, as we're dealing with recycling, the extended producer responsibility changes, which have now come into effect, which can give us an income stream, nonetheless are linked. The amount of future income that we receive will be linked to the quality and amount of recycling that we produce. So it gives us an incentive to want to improve our overall rates of recycling. Also, the so-called simpler recycling, which is another change which has come in through the Environment Act, essentially gives us freedom to adjust the collections pattern. So at the moment, as I think everyone's familiar, we alternate 1 week recycling, 1 week residual or green bin waste, and then obviously weekly food waste collection. We're required, we will be required now, or we are required now by law to do weekly food waste collection. That's fine. We do it anyway. However, we can adjust the number and frequency of collections we do for residual and recycling. And actually, if you look at other areas of the country where they have reduced the number of residual collections, it has seen an increase in overall levels of recycling. So the so-called 3-2-1 system, which is 3 weekly residual, fortnightly recycling, weekly food waste, sees better overall levels of recycling than we do. They've got this across Wales, they've got this in the southwest as well, Bristol and in Somerset, and it seems to work pretty well. The data looks compelling, but to Councillor Kerr's exact point, if we at the moment increase the level of recycling, all the benefits would go to the county council because of the reduced amount of residual waste, and we could see our costs go up with the gate fees for recyclers. So another reason to address things. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of scale here, across the county as a whole, we're spending £70 million a year on waste and environmental services. Environmental services meaning street cleansing and so forth. We're also generating income as well because we're providing commercial waste services, and ODS is a leader in that. So, and actually there's a real incentive for ODS here in terms of being able to potentially expand their commercial waste operation. Overall, whilst as the report to council last month showed, we're seeing slightly declining levels of recycling. Overall, the city and the county and indeed the other districts are all really top performers. So we're in a positive place in terms of recycling overall, which is reflected actually in this year's extended producer responsibility awards. We've all done pretty well, but as I mentioned, there is the future payments will be linked to the amount of recycling achieved. The assessment that activists did when they looked and they did a deep dive across all of our operations, interestingly, is they find that as districts and including the city, our costs for domestic waste management are above the national average, and the county council's costs are below the national average. Now that sort of the county council, if they had officers here, would I'm sure want to explain that there are a variety of reasons why they might have lower costs, but it does at its heart suggest that there might be some need to rebalance costs across the system. Why are our costs higher than the average as a district for collection? Well, part of that's easy to explain, which is that the cost model has been based on the sort of the current position, and up until now only half of the districts in the UK actually do separate food waste collections. Food waste collections are expensive, so if you do a cost analysis across districts which aren't doing food waste, it would be unsurprising that they spend less money. Next slide. I did mention the picture on recycling. So the top shows you the overall rate for Oxfordshire as a whole, which I would describe as flatlining, but slightly coming off from a peak back in, you can see a long way back in the sort of 2010s. And for the city, and the date scale is very different here. It is just to show you that in the last year or two, we are seeing falling rates of recycling in the city. Now, there are lots of particular programs that we're running to try and address that anyway, to do with engagement, to do with changing arrangements for the bin stores at some of our tenanted flats and so forth. But nonetheless, the opportunity to do something like 3-2-1 could actually materially sort of change this pattern. Next. So we have actually already started collaborating now with other districts. So we opened up when ODS did its most recent procurement for contracts with recyclate managers. I don't know how best to describe them. The companies that take away our recycling and materials. We re-tendered for that recently, and we enabled West Oxfordshire to come in off the back of our tender, and as a result, they saw a £500,000 per annum saving to them. So that's to them, but it sort of reflects the benefit that you get from being able to operate at scale, and that goes across all sorts of different areas of procurement. For example, fleet vehicles, bins themselves, and so on. It was very clear, both from the Oxfordshire Resources and Waste Partnership, which is the partnership that involves all cabinet members from all 6 councils. So Councillor Nigel Chapman for the city, that the discussions within that group suggest that there is the appetite to work much more sort of collectively. And I think it's fair to say that both the ambitions around climate change, the ambitions around management of recycling and so on are really pretty much shared across all the councils in Oxfordshire. This is not an area of political contention. I think there is really broad agreement on what we're trying to do. So overall, the view is that with City, Charwell, West Oxfordshire and County, if we work collaboratively, we think we can deliver efficiencies of between 1 and 3 million. You may be asking, well, where's Southern Vale in all this? Southern Vale have decided that they want to proceed with a re-tender of their contract, which they currently hold with Biffa. So they've had that contract for many, many years. That's literally in the last week just gone out to tender. That comes into effect next year as well. We have had extensive discussions with them. They're not ruling out the possibility that if in the end the sort of tenders they get back from their exercise, their procurement exercise, are not sufficiently attractive, they might still come and join as sort of what we're doing. But at the moment, they're wanting to step outside of that. So the next sort of pieces of work is we have agreed to keep Activist on now to help us deliver as a foursome a full business case for joint operations. So that's essentially going to look at what would it take both to merge our collection operations, but also to look at it from a much more integrated sense, end to end, from collection through to disposal, and look at how costs can be more costs and incentives can be appropriately shared across that system. The roadmap reference here of short-term, medium and long-term projects to deliver efficiencies is just straightforwardly, there are so many individual components associated with waste and waste contracts, but which is unsurprising when you've got a £70 million economy doing that within Oxfordshire. And so we're trying to break it down into chunks that can be dealt with, and we want work plans for each of these. So there are some areas which we could just continue to find savings without actually any formal agreement for a sort of a joint operation. For example, if we all procured bins together, we could immediately find very significant amounts of savings rather than having our own individual contracts. But what we want is we want a series of options through this full business case, which ultimately could be a full integrated operation. I wanted to highlight again that ODS is also looking at the commercial waste offering in partnership with Charwell and West. And I think that the discussions that our neighbouring authorities have had with ODS have been really positive in getting them to see what an effective waste operation ODS is operating, and in particular in this commercial space. So both West and Charwell currently have their own really small waste service providers in the commercial space. I think both think that it would be advantageous to actually go in with ODS and allow an expanded footprint there. And then the last point here is that I mentioned simpler recycling. This is we've decided that we are going to look across the whole county on this one, and so that's why it's standing slightly separately from this specific partnership project. But we want to take an assessment to see whether or not actually moving to a 3-2-1 approach could be made to work here within Oxfordshire. The numbers would suggest that it probably would, but we need to be confident about those numbers. There's also it's probably beneficial for all areas to move to this at the same time, rather than for some bits of the county to move to it and others not to do so. So, but we're sort of, as I say, we're running that as a tandem project. I don't know if there's another slide. Yeah. Okay. So yes, the next steps. The chief execs have met and discussed the partner authorities. What they've essentially asked for is evolution. So I think what that sort of means is a menu of options which can be we can choose from, and also that what they're after is things that we can get on with straight away. So we don't have to look for a big bang solution here. We can get on and share some areas of activity before necessarily moving to a sort of fully integrated way of working. We've set up joint programme board now involving the 4 authorities. I am the City Council's representative on that board. ODS sit on it alongside me, but obviously as ODS is our LATCO operator, they're not actually in a sense a sovereign entity as the council is. They don't have a vote, but they have got the expertise much more than I. And so, as I said, we work very closely, and Jason Munro is the ODS representative. And as I mentioned, we're twin tracking both the development of this full business case for a fully integrated operation across the county, as well as identifying efficiencies which we can get cracking on meanwhile. And the objective is to have that full business case produced by June. And I think that is the end.
Great, excellent, very clear. I mean, again, this sounds like something that is kind of very sensible, and as you say, unlikely to be politically controversial. There may be some elements of it that would need further review later on, and maybe, but the idea of jointly working in a more aligned way on a waste strategy does seem to be fairly sensible. I'm going to throw this open out now to questions from councillors. Judith. Councillor Harley.
Hi, I just have a question about your 3-2-1 model. Is there any risk to health or risk of vermin from the collection that you're going to have every 3 weeks, as opposed to now having it every 2 weeks? Is there any potential hazard that might happen of, changing that particular pattern?
There shouldn't be, because if we can get everyone to put their food waste in food waste receptacles, they're going to carry on collecting those weekly. We're mandated by law to do that. We have to collect food waste weekly, and we will continue to do that. So actually you touch on something which is an issue, and we do need to work harder to deal with, which is that too many people don't put their food waste in the food waste bin, and instead put it in the green bin. Some people even put it in the blue bin, which is a real problem, because that's not that then essentially means.
Has Mish cut for anybody else?
Yes.
Okay, so well, let's hope he comes back shortly. I'll just type and suggest that he cuts his video. Mish, can you kill your video. I'm just, for the sake of the chat, for the sake of the video, I'm just suggesting to Mish that he turns off his video so that we might hear him better. I think he's dropped and will hopefully come back in again shortly. I think he'll probably clarify this point, but I also think there's no decision yet to go to a 3-2-1. There's a decision to review it as part of the ongoing strategy. But Councillor Harley, I'll let him answer that to you, and I will take Mish, are you back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Great, fabulous. If it helps you to turn off your video, if it improves your internet connectivity, feel free to do that.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, absolutely no decision on 3-2-1. We would want to be absolutely clear that it was also economically in our interest to do so. As a council, we couldn't afford to do it simply to, in a sense, give all the value to the county council. So it would need to be part of an integrated way of working. We'd want to also be confident, for example, with some blocks of flats at the moment, we have to do residual waste collections more frequently than fortnightly. So actually telling them, oh, well, we're now going to come and do it 3 weekly, it just wouldn't work. That's just not practicable. So we'd have to make sure that what we actually did, the system that we set up, was practicable for residents. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Councillor Miles, I think you are next, and then Councillor Hunt.
So I guess building on Councillor Harley's question about sort of the evidence base and sort of the impacts of this system, are you going to be looking at, and if not, maybe this relates to a recommendation, evidence from areas with high numbers of students? Because my understanding is that there can be problems with student waste management, and given we've got a very large number of students in the city, this can have an impact. But whilst I've also got some other points that relate to that, which are this question of the fact that from the demand side, we have a disproportionate number of people that aren't paying for waste collection. How does that figure in this kind of whole assessment? Do you take into account that? And then related to the broader question, which I think you indicated as a contextual issue earlier on, how is this going to be, this whole review going to be looking at the densification of, well, I guess for us in Oxford, the city, I mean, there will be other areas that become more dense within the wider county over time because of the growing number of households, but that will have then an impact on the number of bins required and space requirements. Is that something that sort of is being looked at as part of that, please?
Yeah. So picking those in turns on students, I mean, yeah, I mean, students is not just an issue. It's a perennial issue because, of course, you get a new batch each year, so you have to start all over again. We do, and quite a lot of the work of the engagement officers at ODS are focused on students. Now they do work with Brookes University in particular, sort of households, because it's essentially students in living out in sort of shared houses, which are the problem. Students living in large halls and colleges and so on, they have waste collected in large communal bins. That's not where the issues are. But it isn't just students. I mean, let's be clear. We have issues in a number of places in terms of, if you like, understanding and behaviours associated with recycling. So yes, we have looked at other areas with sort of high densities of students. Bristol has been really successful in that space. I think they're kind of the standout exemplar for having kind of really moved the dial. And yes, we're interested in what they've done. But as I say, we can't ever stand still in this place. We'll never crack it because we've always got to keep at it. In terms of those that are not paying for waste sort of collection, I wasn't quite sure. I mean, obviously, students don't pay in the sense that they don't pay council tax. I mean, that's a sort of a broader, sort of just a thing, I suppose, for the council. We have, as I suspect you're aware, we have been focusing on houses that are being used for short lets and trying to get them moved off council tax and onto business rates. And some of the student accommodation might be treated in this way, and it's a sort of separate piece of work that's been looked at by colleagues in the finance team. But yes, I mean, where it is appropriate that a dwelling should be actually paying business rates, effectively a dwelling is operating on a commercial basis, then it's a different set of arrangements. And yes, they would have to pay for waste collection. It's not just have them sort of delivered under the normal domestic environment. And densification. Well, densification is certainly something we need to think about. So densification in the city means that we have already made provision in the budget this year for needing, probably within the next couple of years, to put an extra crew out. But that pattern is mirrored all over. And if we can actually merge operations, our collection operations, with the sort of essentially with West Oxfordshire and Cherwell, well, obviously as Cherwell borders Oxford, there would be opportunities for efficiencies, no question, to be able to run operations across that geography, and more efficient use of fleet generally, and just because we always have to keep reserve fleet and so on. So yes, the more households and densification is generally sort of speaking another reason why looking at a more shared provision for collections makes sense.
Yeah, may I just come back on a couple of those points? Is that okay? So just with the business rates, I understand with the short-term lets, like the Airbnbs, which is a struggle in itself, I understand. But with the fact that increasing numbers of students are living out, as in not in purpose-built accommodation, and they don't pay council tax, but the more that you have, so they're displacing families or young professionals, maybe, I don't know, other people who will be paying council tax. How do we deal with that? Because that's going to be an increased burden on our waste collection, and that's something that is carried by the city and not the other districts. So is there something that we need to do to lobby at national level, or to sort of address that, because this is part of this waste review, and is there anything to recommend on that? And then the other thing, I mean, I realise that we're looking at hopefully reducing the size of bins, but if you've got densification issue, you probably will have more bins per house, and you see that in HMO areas. The area that Jemima represents, for instance, very high number of the properties, I think, are being increasingly extended, so that there might have been 4 sort of people living in there before, and now they're 8 because of ways of which you can sort of change planning and HMO sizes, which makes it very easy to expand. That then means there's multiple extra bins outside the house. So is there a review of like the actual receptacles that are going to be storing that waste, if they're going to be out for longer periods of time? And then connected to that, there is this policy coherence question. We've adopted this support for walkable cities and curbside strategies, where we don't have then this obstacle course for blind, disabled people, pushing a pushchair, anyone walking on a pavement. And then if you've suddenly got on bin day, bins obstructing the that's going to get worse if we've got more people in the city, and therefore more receptacles and more collection. So how are we going to address that in this review? And is that something that just goes beyond the remit, or is there something we can do? So I've long advocated for the Dutch model in Amsterdam, which is below water, remember, and they actually store their rubbish underground. We're above water, so we should be able to maybe also do that. We've got a high water table too. But is there something that is really innovative? I know it says right at the beginning that we're not having a revolution, it's evolution, but can we have a revolution in waste collection, please?
Well, okay, let's start with student households. So there is a piece of work. It's just at essentially inception stage. It's not part of this review. Discussing with a couple of other cities, or I should say collection authorities, which have high numbers of students, where we think that there's common interest in looking to see whether or not landlorded dwellings which are entirely given over to sort of student lets, with, as I think you correctly say, increasing numbers of students in some, so properties which are being converted to put more and more and more essentially accommodation within a small space. I saw one recently down in Marston, which had 10 in effectively what would have been an old-fashioned 3-bed semi. How they fit 10, I have no idea, but absolutely those businesses, and we're interested to see whether or not we can actually sort of take a case that they can be treated as businesses, be subject to business rates and so on. Now, this is a bigger thing, which is sort of, as I say, it sort of goes beyond waste, I think you can see, and it sort of involves finance team as well as waste team. But it's the waste team, there has been an interest in identifying such areas. I think the reasons that you've outlined. The question about sort of bins and size of receptacles, if 321 is successful, then we end up with less stuff going into the green bin, because at the moment, and we do analysis of the residual waste bin all the time, there's loads of stuff that gets put into green bins generally, which could be recycled. So if we can encourage people to put more things into the blue bin, then that's a good thing, and that's how you push your recycling up. So it certainly wouldn't want to start with the premise that we give everyone bigger green bins. That would be so counterproductive. So it's, as I say, it's about trying to encourage patterns of behavior. The amount of waste overall, one assumes, is the same. If anything, actually, there's another sort of parallel thing, which is about trying to get people to think about waste more generally, and what is waste and what can be reused. And then you've got the packaging producers through the EPR, who will now have more of an incentive to minimize the amount of packaging, because it's going to cost them money, and so that should actually begin to shrink waste volumes as well. On the undergrounding bins, I'd love to underground bins. I think that would be marvelous. But I don't think that's going to happen, and it's certainly not where we thought to do that. So no, we're operating within the UK legislative sort of arrangements, which would require us to provide door-to-door collection of waste broadly along the lines that you see. Simply Recycling allows us to make some variation in the pattern of collections, but requires dedicated domestic food waste collections weekly. That's essentially the one thing that it says you have to do it like that. So I don't think that there's likely to be any change in that.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, is that okay? Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, I think it's just the curbside strategy thing and the policy coherence with other policy areas, like where people actually put their waste. So I understand that it can't be underground, but on bin day, basically, I mean, I look out the window and see on my street, there are a number of people in both wheelchairs and who are blind who are going down the street, and it's impossible for them on bin day. How are we going to address that from an equalities point of view in the way that we're managing the bin collection? Can that be part of any kind of review to see what good practice is to address that? Because unless we actually, it's kind of an elephant in the room. It's we say one thing in one policy, and other policy is that we can stop on Thursdays, or on my street, if you're blind or even in your wheelchair, you're not going to be able to get down the pavement. You just don't go out. How can we address that?
I mean, it's not I should be clear, that isn't a strand of work within this review, which is essentially about seeking to integrate existing operations. What you're describing be sort of different. I confess, I'm not sure I would understand the legislation well enough to be able to say whether or not you could even do it much about it, on the basis that we have to provide sort of the receptacles for people to put domestic waste in, and we have to offer a sort of a curbside collection arrangement. So quite how, I mean, short of essentially requiring people to be there at home to sort of take their bin out as the lorry proceeds down the street and then bring it back in again, I'm not sure realistically how that could be achieved. It's not something that I've looked at, Councillor Miles. I'm not sure how it could easily be addressed. It's something which I think it would be good to have sort of further discussions and you know, discussions with groups. It's probably more that at a street level, rather than the expecting ODS operatives to do anything about this. If at a street level there were people who actually were prepared to go out and pull the bins back in off the pavements to reduce the obstruction on bin day, I think that might be that might be an option. But as I say, this is something which we'd have to have a look at separately.
Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering about the flatlining in terms of take up for recycling. You say you think it's flatlining. I wondered what was going on there and whether that's around messaging, and also something that you know other councils I think are starting to do, and certainly you know one always used to do, was the return schemes, returning bottles. Do you think that's something that Oxford will be looking at?
So on the recycling flatlining, it's essentially been something of a national trend. There was a big increase in recycling rates at the point at which sort of dry mixed recycling was enabled in different areas, and that would be at different times in different parts of the country, but we were fairly early here in Oxfordshire. And but if you look anywhere in the country, it's flatlined for a long time. Unfortunately, since the pandemic, in pretty much all areas of the country, we've seen some reduction in recycling levels, which is probably a mixture of it's probably linked to home working to some extent, and the increased because recycling levels are effectively a proportion, so they're percentage. So if you've got more residual waste, then proportionately your recycling level is lower. So that'll be a factor too. There's other sort of odd things that you wouldn't necessarily immediately assume which are going on. For example, smaller dwellings, smaller gardens, garden waste counts within the overall recycling volumes, and so with smaller dwellings, more flats, fewer gardens, you're going to see, relatively speaking, less recycling as well. So there are some odd things, but there's also some behavioural stuff going on too. And it's the behavioural stuff that we really need to get to. And we can see that because we can see where there are some sort of areas of problem. We've talked about students already, and you know, that is undeniably a factor. On the deposit return scheme, I'm pleased to say that that is going ahead. So the government has actually pressed the button on that, and that is now absolutely going to happen. There's all sorts of things going to have to be worked out as to the sort of the how, and these they're going to undoubtedly test different ways of doing this. So-called reverse vending machines are being considered as the sort of the preferable approach, and initially it's going to be fairly limited to just plastic and metal drinks containers, so they're going to start modestly, really. So glass isn't going to be included initially, but
I mean, glass is the obvious one.
Yes, it's also apparently not my area of expertise, more difficult to actually sort of manage through a sort of collection process. But I think that the intention within certainly when you read the government's paper on this is that they would extend it to glass in due course. So yeah, a deposit return scheme, 2027. It's going to happen. Absolutely.
Oh, that's good news. I mean, just as a comment, in Brazil, and I'm sure this used to be the case in Britain, you know, you would have, and certainly this would be perfect for students, you know, you just have your own crate basically, and you buy 12 bottles of beer and then you put them back in the crate, and then you take the crate back and you give it in, and you take,
Yeah, there are
see
some
the
questions.
buckets of glass bottles outside the student houses. It's just all going to be smashed. It's
There are
completely
some
ludicrous.
questions though, Councillor Hunt. I think it's more complex than it sounds. Like it sounds great, but we've already got curbside recycling, which obviously they didn't have in Brazil. There's a different kind of cost of you know, individuals working. You know, I think I support the government's aims broadly, but it's an expensive way of replicating something which we kind of already to a degree have, and possibly should be focused on investing £500 million in improving our curbside rates. But anyway, regardless, it's a national government strategy. I just think it sounds simpler than it is, because you've seen it work in other countries, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for where we are starting in the UK. But regardless, we are where we are. Sorry, did you have any further questions? Great. I don't have any further questions. Does anyone else? I'm just checking the Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I just have a recommendation, if that's okay, based on what we've heard from Mish. And it might not be appropriate, but let's just tell me if it is or not. But that we just recommend that the City Council it does this work to explore the cost recovery from student landlords related to waste services and other action areas due to the densification of student properties in the city, and challenges related to waste management and costs.
Agreed. I think perhaps depending on the scope of that work would be my kind of key question. Mish, does that seem feasible?
Yes.
Or is that a huge and large piece of work?
It is quite a large piece of work, because there are a number of different teams need to be involved, and there is definitely a strength in numbers opportunity here. So we want to get other councils in a similar position to act with us, but I think that this is worth pursuing. Yes.
Great. And, you know, as a first cut, it might be understanding, as you say, in depth more from other councils, you know, who's managed to do this. So as you mentioned, Bristol, there presumably, again, there may be other places with high student populations that, you know, it's worth looking at. Yeah, I'm just thinking about how much this adds to the workload versus the potential upside, which can be significant. So I suppose coming back with a pragmatic recommendation that is, you know, we think we should do this and we'll scope out the work before we necessarily spend 8 months on it, would probably be the, you know, the compromise. Scope the work. Let's try and do it, but scope the work. And if it looks ridiculous, you know, but yes, please do scope the work. Agreed. Thank you, Councillor Miles. Any other comments? Great. In which case I will say thank you, Mish, for presenting. And yeah, great. We are closed on the waste review with that recommendation. I'm going to move to matter 9, which is one I will take particular care of, which is around dates of future meetings. So that's the 27th of March at 6 p.m. Is that okay with everybody? To your knowledge at this stage? Excellent. Thank you. Great. And then so we are moving on to the matter 10, which is just to excluding the public and the press from the conference